Yes, socialism, communism, the things that need to change are so big.
General dissatisfaction with the status quo. I'm unsure if there's such a thing as positive masculinity.
How do you feel about the state of the UK when it comes to transphobia?
I mean, not great.
Cool, thanks, bye then. Done. That's all I need.
People involved in GRT activism and disability activism, housing activism, they explicitly refer to themselves as communist. Hello.
Hello, how are you?
Oh, I'm alright, thank you. How are you?
Good, thank you. I feel obliged to start with some stuff I've watched of yours and really, really liked and gelled with. The most recent being the Pride video, so I don't know if congratulations is the word or...
Yeah, it's a weird one because obviously there's a distance between the video coming out and then actual like a process of coming out with friends. So it doesn't feel like coming out. It feels different to that.
Sure.
Also, because half the folk in the comments and in the premiere were like, "Oh, we know."
Sure. Okay, that's fair. Yeah, had a little bit of an experience with that of my second coming out, but yeah, for sure. But I think that can be quite heartwarming as well, can't it? Because it's, I don't know, really.
No, it's nice. It's a nicer reaction than a lot of than others could get.
Yes.
It's sort of gentle. Yeah, we all figured this isn't really.
Yeah, if it comes in with a lack of like negativity to add to that, then great.
Yeah.
And how has that been online as well? I mean, I imagine obviously most of your fan base are going to be fine with that kind of thing, but in general, do you get any kind of hate comments?
Not really. I thought this would happen. The main stuff, the main hate comments and stuff that's critical is because obviously it's a video also about Israeli colonialism.
Yes.
It's mainly like Zionist comments.
Sure.
And sometimes they use the coming out to then attack you in certain ways, which is, whatever. But I can deal with Zionists.
Fair enough.
Water off my back.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, yeah, similar to me with JK Rowling based stuff and transphobes. Like, I eat them for breakfast. Like, if I'm not going to be able to deal with that, what am I doing here? So I appreciate that. Another video I watched of yours, I mentioned this when we were chatting, was the Girlboss video, and it has very much felt like, for myself personally, as a kind of, like I was saying, that kind of millennial working out that, like, hold on, some of the systems that are surrounding us are so bad and systemically wrong, and then the kind of clock started to tick, and then going as far as to see the Girlboss video and talking about the capitalist side of it and, the socialist. I've definitely become far more socialist in the past 2 years because of that, very much because of that factor. I think I have a lot of millennial friends that have almost burnt out in that kind of corporate capitalist world and are starting to expect a similar relationship back from their employer and say, oh, well, look, I've worked really hard for you for 10 years, but I've had a breakdown. How about some side from you? And then they're getting fired or, made redundant. And people are really, especially in my network anyway, rethinking things. So for that video as well, how was that received? Because I've not seen very similar content in LeftTube as far as I've been aware in my little circle of knowledge.
Yeah. I mean, I don't have a particularly large platform. I've got about 30,000 subscribers, and what that means is most videos don't really leave my ecosystem.
Your system, yeah, sure.
So I don't get huge amount, and especially back then, that was I maybe had 10,000 when that was released. So it did well, and lots of people, my friends or people online were like, "This is really good," and really liked the video, and I'm that's one of my ones I'm very proud of. I think it's just a tight script.
Yes.
And enjoy it.
Very.
And I know, for example, the sort of wider impact it had. One of Abby's videos, she told me was one of the characters was based on that sort of that Girlboss video.
Lovely.
So it had a nice and wider impact beyond the sort of the view count of it would suggest.
Yes. Nice.
And it didn't get much pushback, to be honest.
Good.
Like now and then, you have a lot of, like, sometimes people miss points, so they don't understand things. Sometimes people are just deadheads.
Because it can be.
The internet.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And you kind of have to sort out which of the responses are people having genuine questions and genuine sort of interactions. And because of the nature of how complex all this stuff is necessarily a massive simplification.
Yes,
The content that's produced. So there is a lot of room for critique and a lot of room for further expansion, which is worth delving into. Sometimes people are just like, so you don't believe in feminism? It's like,
yeah, totally.
Yeah, I mean, like, the premise of the video is to critique this feminism from a feminist point of view.
Yeah.
Rather than, like, outside of it. So it's a bizarre sort of, you have to sort of deal with how I hate the phrase, but how good faith those sort of critiques are when they
absolutely
reach
you. Yeah, I think that if that's the only thing they can pick on as well, then it's kind of in a weird way a compliment.
Yeah, and you get that similarly with the last one, where, like, if someone's attacking you for you know, being not giving Israel enough credit, you're like, well, you've not really paid attention.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. That kind of brings me on to something that I'm fearful will take a lot of time as well. So because I know I've only got you for a while, I wanted to get this out sooner. But with that in mind, with JK Rowling now, which as a term, not even as a name, as just as a term, has become so potent, especially in YouTube. But like, if we could move to the conversation of transgenderism as well, kind of, because I'd like to get a big bite into that and then cover some other stuff, some fun stuff, some, you know, communist, socialist vibes. But from your perspective, and this is generally a general, you know, really something I'm interested in, I will always see everything through the eyes of a trans woman. Even my husband, as a cis male, will see it through my eyes and think about me first. And I think that happens quite often in the left. And there are times when I catch myself and say, but we aren't the centre of the world. There are, you know, people talking about Hogwarts Legacy specifically. Can you separate the art and that ongoing debate? I'd love to just, first of all, quite openly get your kind of opinion on things, because I've not as well seen in your content too much heavy JK stuff. So is there a reason behind that, or is that not really on purpose?
A reason behind not specifically talking about JK Rowling?
Kind of, yeah.
I mean, the way that I pursue sort of making videos tends to be just like, has this topic annoyed me in a certain way that, like, maybe no one else is talking about.
Sure.
And JK Rowling's
been talked about
being a horrendous transphobe is something which is talked about by lots of people, lots of my friends who are trans, and talk about this in a much better, much more eloquent way than I can.
Right.
And I guess as well, for the way I look at a lot of this stuff, it tends not to be through an individual, unless I can make a way that is illustrative of the larger systemic problem.
The issue, sure.
So, for example, like the times that I have talked about, like, I talked about a book on degrowth and talked about Pierre Coffin's book and this guy, Lee Phillips. Yeah. And the reason for those is because they were both basically really common criticisms that you get. So you can just be like, these are two annoying folk, common stuff, deal with it there.
Sure.
And similarly, the only other time I've talked about individuals specifically was a few years back on white supremacy within the left.
Yes.
And again, those were figures that were basically reproducing lots of similar stuff, and both of these things were things that people hadn't really spoken about before.
Right. Yeah.
Let's talk about JK Rowling and the specific issue of JK Rowling and Hogwarts Legacy game. I'm not sure how much I can use that to talk about the wider problem
greater systemic issue, sure,
of transphobia and how that's reproduced. I think you could maybe talk about like the product, like game development or cultural projection.
Sure.
That's again slightly out of my
your
area.
scope. Yeah, sure. And some of the better videos I've seen have done that. They've talked about it as a game, as an industry. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm sure that, and also, I was never really into Harry Potter in the same way that a lot of people were, so it wasn't like a big cultural touchstone for me as other people.
Sure.
Which makes talking about like having to get into the game or having to get into the world in a way that it takes a lot of work to sort of disentangle. And you could just talk about like JK Rowling as a transphobe. You could talk about her class position as indicative of like the wider transphobic milieu of specifically the UK and how that happens, which is interesting to me, and I think it's tied in together with the Girlboss stuff. And that might be something that I'd do a video on at some point.
But that alone a video does not make.
And it's just how much I can feel like I can add to the conversation that's already been covered in other places.
For sure.
So that is, and I don't have many rules for making a video, but I've always felt like, what is it I can actually add to this? So I'm not just repeating something.
Yeah, for the sake of clicks.
So Abby's last video was on effective altruism.
Yes.
And we discovered at the same time that we were working on the videos at the same time, because she asked me to do a voice for it, and I was like, oh, I'm going to be competing with this video.
LeftTube.
But I watched it and I was like, okay, I can add a lot to this topic.
Great.
If it was redundant, I would just give up, but I can add something, so there's something worth saying.
Okay. Will Finster be on your one as well? Fair. No, that makes a lot of sense. And again, kind of answers the question about my perspective as a trans woman. And I mean, I would say a Harry Potter fan as a kid. I slept with the books under my pillow. I guess you don't do that if you hated it. But I guess, how would you say the UK feels now? For example, so I did a video about JK Rowling's Baylor's Place. I don't know if you know about it.
No, not aware of that. Is that one of her books?
No, so covered some of the books, but so she started a kind of support centre for victims of certain assault, I will say.
Oh.
Yes, but it was gender critically run and legally done so because of the legislation in the UK that allowed this kind of this transphobic kind of separation because of the single sex space. And so I would argue that there are links to a kind of wider frame of like, this is the state of the UK. But potentially just sidestepping JK Rowling, how do you feel about the state of the UK when it comes to transphobia and the what I call the social war against trans rights?
I mean, not great.
Cool, thanks, bye then. Done. That's all I need.
I mean, it's bizarre how it's become so quickly the sort of entry point for a lot of fascist politics.
Absolutely.
Just last Friday, I was down in South London at a counter protest against Turning Point UK, who were protesting a drag event which wasn't happening.
Right.
They'd got their dates mixed up, and they were protesting this bar which used to have a regular drag time story hour.
Right.
But we organised a counter protest anyway, because you can't let people allow them to be on the street.
Of course, yeah. Unchallenged, yeah, for sure.
And alongside the banners saying "groom puppies, not children," and like all and like a woman and those women's march pussy hats. Alongside those types of transphobic women were people with Nazi iron crosses.
Yes.
Someone who'd been arrested for throwing a Nazi salute. And Lawrence Fox. And just this coalition of fascists and Nazis.
Gosh.
And they're all basically rallied around this one issue of transphobia.
Yes.
Which is wider and similar and picks up a lot of the same discourses as wider anti-queer stuff.
Yes.
So they're shouting like paedophile at us, or like shouting.
Yeah, it was used for homosexual men. Yeah.
It's a long history of anti-queer fascist rhetoric.
Sure.
And I think Judith Butler was basically correct when they said that transphobia is at the forefront of fascism right now. I mean,
Yes.
and also Islamophobia. I think that kind of ties together.
Sure. That never really went away. And yeah.
Never really went away, and it's still sort of a feature of a lot of the stuff.
Yeah.
In terms of, there's an interesting dynamic though, where it seems to be quite an elite sort of movement, the transphobia, where a lot of opposition to it seems very top down. Most people tend to not think about it.
Yes.
Because there's not that many trans
No,
people around.
of course.
When asked about it, they're generally like, all right, fine.
Yeah, for sure.
And like, there's a joke from trans women I know a little bit, who said once, the UK doesn't necessarily have more transphobes than everyone else. It's just every single transphobe has a newspaper column or is an MP. And
oh, that's so true, and that's so true. But they've all been cancelled, apparently. Yeah.
They've all been cancelled.
Yeah, they've all been cancelled, but we can't stop hearing about them. Yeah, that's very. Yeah, I can feel that actually.
One of the more sort of disappointing, I think, moments recently regarding transphobia was Nicola Sturgeon's resignation.
Yeah, I saw.
To be clear about that, I'm not like a fan of Nicola Sturgeon. I think she's a very specific politician, what she wants to achieve.
Okay.
And, she left gender recognition way too long.
Yes.
Until she had to do it because it was politically expedient for it to do so.
Sure. Sure.
But now that she has left or has resigned, the issue of the gender recognition bill is being thrown up again. Where previously the Scottish Government would have put it through, and it almost certainly would have passed, and there would have been some degree of respite for trans comrades here.
Sure.
And it would have been like one of the few, like a very. I'm not big into Scottish independence. It doesn't matter too much to me. But if this was a situation where there's one clear material benefit for trans comrades of mine, I would have been like, yeah, get that shit done.
Of course.
Do something very quickly.
Yeah.
But it's now become quite unclear as to how that's going to proceed.
In
part because of that resignation, because of how fractured and weird the Scottish nationalist scene is. That's a whole other conversation.
Yeah. The section you said about not very many trans women, or not many trans people, I agree with that, because not only do as someone that's mostly passing, or I don't know, I don't like that term, but basically I like to define it as people talk about trans rights in front of me, and it's very clear that they don't assume me to be a part of the conversation like I am. I've been asked if I'm pregnant, stuff like that. And the way people talk about transgenderism, who are kind of like on the fence, the kind of like, it's in the news enough that everyone talks about it now, but not everyone has a transgender sibling or friend. It feels like it's much easier to vilify us and put us as that alien, evil thing lurking in the toilets and grooming kids, heaven forbid, because there's no one actually fighting in their circles, in their networks. And I think that, similar to kind of other minorities and even intersectional minorities, like, that aren't apparent from your appearance at certain stages, again, it gets very, very, that's a very simplified version of saying it, but it's not always as easy to have those conversations, and it's very hard to feel like it's my responsibility every single time in every social element to say, actually, you do know a trans woman, and then pull out my massive, scroll and be like, day one, it's not always okay that I want to. It's not always like my responsibility to.
So I generally take the view that things like overcoming prejudices are things that can only really happen at a personal level.
Sure.
I think that education and pieces of media and content have some value, but that value is only very limited.
Right.
And kind of the way that you get over that a lot of the prejudices and the bigotries that exist in your personal life is just having conversations with them. I've had them with my family quite a lot.
Yeah, yeah.
My dad is surprisingly extremely sound on it. Both trans rights and like sex worker liberation as well.
Oh, cool.
It's just like weirdly like specifically as like you talk to me and you're like, oh yeah, no, you're right.
Cool. Yeah. One less thing to fight about at Christmas dinner. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he's always been slightly odd, like not like homophobic, but like he's always had a kind of fascination with like gay people, so it's a slightly different thing. So I was like, so when you're having those conversations with these different like trans people and stuff, you're like slightly guarded, and then he's just like saying correct shit. Yeah, cool. And I think that also extends into like wider organising work as well, and
yes,
whatever groups you might be involved in, whether that's a union, a renters union, or whatever. Because those places are hotbeds of bigotry as well. Anywhere in the left is just as bad as it is anywhere else.
Yes.
And it just often takes difficult conversations and difficult work to try and unpack that within those organisations.
Yeah, for sure. That kind of brings me to maybe a segue to the next point. It might be quite... It's almost too weak to probably not have to edit it, if that makes sense. So you when you watch this back, you will see no segue, but it more makes me think about... So you mentioned briefly earlier about the white supremacy on the left, and it's something I've seen again in the kind of journey of uneducating myself, basically, is how I like to jokingly put it. Obviously, I think I know the person you're talking about. Might not have to name them, but don't really give it. To be fair,
it's up to you.
To be honest, for my channel, it's like it's the necessary. If it happens, it happens. So, but specifically looking at, I think it's Princess Flowers and what happened to that creator. Professor Flowers. Sorry. Yes. Professor Flowers. It's something that really interests me as a white female, trans woman, stepping into content creation, and especially someone that is aspiring to be on the left and make decent left content. It's the kind of question that I see a lot of other people in a similar position, not necessarily in content creation, but white people learning about systematic racism and saying, oh, okay, I'm going to solve this. I'm going to jump right in. I'm going to learn everything. I'm going to make it right. And then when you learn enough, you realize like, oh, that's the worst thing I could even want to do. And as someone that's definitely aware of it and unable to kind of know what to do, what is the right thing to say, other than just I will understand my privilege and educate myself as much as I can. As a white creator, how do you step out in that kind of realm, if that makes sense? So
I'm going to do a very me thing and recommend a book.
Yay!
There's a very good book called Elite Capture by Olufemi Atayo. It's in my bookshelf, but I'd have to get up to get it. Where he talks about the ways in which talking about social justice has sometimes been co-opted by a deference, which is sort of like you were talking about earlier. Like, it's exhausting for you to constantly have to talk about trans issues, be the one responsible for it.
Sure.
But there's a deference that a lot of particularly white people say, where like, it's about racism, so we'll just defer to this person, and it's often quite lazy. It's quite pointed sometimes, because it allows you to basically point to someone who agrees with you and say, this is my token racialized person who agrees with me.
Right, yeah.
So actually having to talk about these issues, the real, like, my main tactic is just very well researched and well cited arguments.
Nice, okay, yeah.
So if anyone comes to me, I have evidence and citations to back it up.
Yeah.
And that's a product of my larger training as, an early career academic as well.
Yeah.
Which I don't have. Not open to everyone. I think in sort of a general emotional level, what exactly is it that, I think the question is, what are you aiming to get from stepping into the conversation?
Sure.
Are you actually approaching it because you think there is an injustice that's worth actually talking about, that's driving you mad, that people aren't able to grasp, which is what motivated that specific video.
Yeah.
And also on part because Professor Flowers was being attacked by so many
Absolutely.
people, so I was like, I need to do something to try and
for sure.
like do something.
Yeah, that was proof, like shown. Yeah.
So I think a sort of mix of an emotional, like an emotional and moral clarity about what it exactly is you want to say and do and why you want to do it, mixed with just strong.
Do it well. Yeah, do it really well. Yeah. Fair.
Yeah, and kind of just have to be. There's a little bit of humility where people will disagree with you, and they'll be that's fine as well. Fine disagreements.
Yeah.
There's like wider issues which I'm still grappling with and don't have answers to, which are things like making a video like that generates income for me. So what's the moral?
It's so wild. Yes.
Question.
Yeah, and especially if you're citing like Khadija Mumbai, and then they might not be getting a monetary effect of that, and it's a whole minefield of hypocrisy, really. And I think that for me, I definitely don't feel qualified enough to make any form of a statement and add to any conversation. And I think that where I very much put my channel, or want my channel to be one day, is very kind of soft touch, like kind of like if you're kind of waking up to these things as well, and you really didn't know about them like I didn't at some point, just watching someone throw in things like, hey, maybe we all deserve to live, or maybe actually we don't need these horrendously racist systematic problems, but I'm not the one to tell you about them. Literally, I really am not. Please go and look, that kind of thing. And I think that I don't have much more of a resource to do anything more than that. And like you say, nor should I be. I think there'd be a huge irony in that kind of white saviour feminist thing of like, here, I've solved it. That's not my place, nor do I want it to be. But it's nice. Equally though, I do feel I have no one to ask. And it sounds very dramatic, but like it's nice to speak to someone about this and kind of almost not confirm, but to double check, like, if you're going to get involved in the conversation, have something you really need to say and know how to say it. Otherwise, you can't.
And I generally when I started this, I had the same sort of thought. It was like, unless I'm sure about what I'm saying, I just don't say it. And part of that is because I don't want to be made fun of on the internet.
Yes, it's forever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a bit self-serving, but the other side is like, you have some level of responsibility to produce something that at least you are confident is valuable or has enough. I don't like to say truth to it because
we should all have truth to it.
Epistemic ideals, but that is enough like evidence and
for sure
to back it up.
I did that with a video I did recently on detransitioning, and it's how it's used as a tool in the right wing media as like a weapon. And it was something I kind of went into not fully understanding how much I didn't understand, and by the end of it I was like, oh no, I really like this. I really have learned a lot. I'm proud, and so I can see that. I can see that being the crucial bread and butter.
And it is exciting as well. I love doing research and stuff about this, and like a lot of stuff has made it into my non-YouTube work. Like my PhD would be an entirely different thing if it wasn't for making YouTube videos.
Yeah, sure.
Just because of the research I've done in different places.
Yeah, for sure.
It's good.
Yeah.
I enjoy it.
Yeah, it's a very weird kind of way that I myself as well, like I am a different person, because it's kind of like a fake it till you make it, but like some of the videos who I aspire to be and learn about a specific thing, learn about systemic racism, learn about white feminism, learn about capitalism being such a stupid thing. And then the more I learn about it, the more I get it. And so then in life I practice that a little bit more, and like, I didn't really know what a union was before 20. I know that's so embarrassing, but I know a lot of my generation maybe didn't too. And if we could spend an hour talking about Chicken Run, I fully would, and I know you would too.
In a second.
I have watched that video, and I just, because obviously again I grew up watching Chicken Run, and I wish I could have travelled in time and found myself watching it and being like, hey, not only are you going to look like this in 20 years, but this film is going to mean a whole lot more to you when you hit 31. Yeah. Well, on that note then, talking about socialism, communism, again, something so new to me as in the past 2 years I learned about. How do you feel the perception of those terms has changed, specifically in the UK, but in the West in general? I mean, am I right in thinking that saying someone was a communist could have been like, an arrestable offence in certain parts of Western history? And well, wars have been fought over it. Like, yeah.
I mean, not for a while would you have been arrested for it, but it's definitely. I mean, there's a stock phrase that gets trotted out in a lot of not great academic writing, and the phrase is, in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis, there's been a renewed interest in Marxism.
Right.
And that sort of, it's become passé at this point. But it's kind of, generally, it speaks the truth, which is that the feeling of basically the notion of there is no alternative, the sort of myth of constant expansion, constant increasing living standards for certain people within the like imperial core, the West of Europe and the US, Australia, has resulted in general dissatisfaction with the status quo.
Just life, for sure.
And that has led to some things like, Bernie Sanders or Jeremy Corbyn.
Sure.
Opening mass movements with using the word socialism. And I'm in two minds about the effect of that, because on the one hand it's probably good that more people are becoming open and engaged with those ideas. But on the other hand, it's led to a lot of people misunderstanding what they're talking about when they mean they're socialists.
Even
so they start
redefining them.
talking about like, oh, I'm a socialist, I believe in state funding for the NHS, for the police, for the army.
Yes.
So like,
no, that's not why we're here.
I like your thinking, but let's do some more questioning. Of those issues.
Definitely. Yeah.
I do think that there is probably a growth in radicalism. I think that's reflected in increased union activity. Like last year, the UK lost more strike days than it had done since like 1979.
Yeah.
Which is amazing. Massive increase in renters' unions activities and just a lot of mobilisation on the street, countering anti-fascist protesters. And like wider international movements as well, like BLM has forced a lot of people to reconsider their understanding.
Yeah, conversations to be had at least. Yes. Yeah.
And part of what generates change in people is being engaged in movements. So if you go into a movement, and this happens a lot in just general renters union stuff that I see, where people are like, my landlord's a piece of shit. And you're like, yeah, he is. But the more they're involved, the more sort of aware that they are of the general trends. Like, why is your landlord shit? What is the general problem being spoken about here? What's this connected to? And, why is your area being gentrified? Why is housing being financialised? And all these questions get further and more embedded throughout the action that people are taking. So along with increased mobilisation comes increased ideological awareness of where you would like to go. So that's sort of slightly out of my area. I'm no historian of socialism, or I'm not a historian at all. That's sort of general my impression of what would happen.
It does, it feels like it depicts it well, and I don't know if you agree, but definitely from some of the stuff I've seen, a lot of FD Signify talking more obviously about the race side, but that obviously affects the cost of living. Like you say, it's a classist thing, it's a gentrification issue and stuff, but for me, it feels like the problems and the things that need to change are so big. Like you say, funding or no funding of the NHS is laughably not anywhere near the scale of the change that I know I'd love to see, and now that having learned about it, I know is what's needed. And this newfound wave of socialism, myself included, there's this little crazy, Southeast London girl that's trying to make her way in the YouTube world. But I think that there is also a place that is a start of something. And I know that I've been at like job interviews and people outside waiting to go in and just start talking about how they're communist now. And it's like, that's it's oddly wonderful thing to be a part of in a way. And I'd like to think, that's the next step. I don't think that riches and winning capitalism is as kind of obsessed about and as kind of lusted over as much as it used to be. There's a lot of pressure going back to the kind of opulence that, for example, the Kardashians used to once gloat, and now they're kind of falling from their throne. So
yeah, and there is an interesting sort of we tend to think that how things were immediately previously to how things are is how things have been for a long time.
Yeah.
But that period of when sort of social movement theory and social movement history, until maybe about 1980s, early 1980s, most social movements, the biggest social movements, were like union activism, where there were hotbeds of communism. They had, connections directly to the Soviet Union. NUM had got funding from the Soviet Union, which was one of the reasons why it had to be crushed early on.
Right.
And when that fell, when union activity was outright attacked, you got the rise of like so-called new social movements, and a connection of that to people maybe not outright describing their issues in terms of like socialism, communism, capitalism, labor union activities.
Yeah.
But that, I think, has changed. I think a lot of new social movements, and that's reflected in a lot of my research, people involved in GRT activism and disability activism, housing activism, they explicitly refer to themselves as communist, and they explicitly couch their language in terms of anti-capitalist rhetoric.
Yes.
And I do think part of that is the financial crash and a bunch of other stuff.
I think
it's accentuated by COVID.
Yeah.
Especially for a lot of disabled people.
Yeah.
Who COVID was such an obvious, massive hit to them.
Of course, yeah.
And it became clear just how economically determined a lot of that stuff was.
Yeah.
So it's like, and my dad was a communist. was an open communist.
Right.
Until like he lost hope when Tony Blair was elected, and then sort of then just resigned himself away from it. So it's not. I feel like the 25-year blip between early 1980s and like 2010s is probably the exception rather than the rule for social movements and for people to explicitly talk about themselves in that sense.
Of course, and we also, I know I'm talking specifically just from a point of view from the UK and the West, but learning again, unlearning, whatever we call it, that there were other communisms that happened and countries that made a communist state that were attacked by the US and that almost like that argument of there's never been a successful communism so it can't be a good thing is not the truth, and that there is a reason for that as well. And I think that it's also quite a very Western point of view to say, well, socialism is making a comeback or whatever, when it's like, well, there are places that's not always the historical standpoint. Yeah. Again, I have no idea really what I'm talking about other than that. Something I wanted to make a point of definitely ending on after I've ticked off everything I wanted to say, which is great, or ask you specifically, is to talk about masculinity, because especially on my channel, that is definitely at risk of being completely dropped off the map. For, just in case I end up giving myself dysphoria. But specifically in the left, and also I'd like my channel to be inclusive, and there's literally no point saying I'd like it to be inclusive for people of colour, racialised people, non-binary people, queer people, and then just forget, cis white men or cis men or any person expressing male genders. And so I just wanted to leave some time to say, I don't know, or to ask, how do you think, I know this is a huge thing for like Noah Sampson that brings up and stuff, but how do you think the left can just make itself more welcoming to the male expressing genders?
I don't think there's really a problem with men feeling welcome or unwelcome on the left. I kind of reject that idea that that's an issue. I mean, just looking at the roster of men making it online, I think that a lot of the conversations that have been made around this question have focused on what are the best ways to market ideas to men, and I think that's the framing of that is wrong. That's
already wrong at the point at the start,
and because like there's the classic ideas of like patriarchy, how it hurts men too, which is like it does in certain ways, but like it still gives men power, so there's just is a way that there's no way of like getting around the fact that men or people who benefit from patriarchy are just going to have to give up a lot of power.
There's a disparity, and that to be fixed. I completely understand.
And I kind of just feel like a lot of the conversations try to sort of market an anti-patriarchy view, which misses the point.
For sure.
Men have power.
Yeah.
And I think the other sort of point that I think gets made a lot is about putting forward like a positive masculinity, and that is a point that I've become just increasingly tired with. I'm unsure if there's such a thing as positive masculinity, and I'm not sure as why there would be a reason to be.
Why would you aspire to that anyway?
I mean, what does it mean with it to do, like, what specific traits of masculinity are the things that are positive, and why is it masculinity?
Yes.
Is it associated with a maleness, at which point you're getting into a bunch of like biological determinism and binarism,
and we know where that goes.
I've just increasingly been just trying to
just done with it.
That framework.
I completely agree with that, and from the sense of trans women as well, I'll go into why in a second, but it goes to the bigger picture, doesn't it? It's like you're trying to argue for huge change in a system that keeps everything as it is, and that's not going to change anything. And I think you're right, arguing that, hey guys, come on board with anti-patriarchy as well, because it might benefit you too. It's like, that's not, you're instantaneously just sticking to the status quo, and what's the point? And I think the good argument of that I like to reuse, and I think works well, is the I wrote it down because it's quite wordy, social reproductive labour, and how I use the way of saying how it's expected for a woman to now work also, but still have children physically. That right is taken away from people that can have children, and then also be responsible for looking after them, and how you've mentioned in other videos about how that's then a classes issue and a race issue, because it's shifted about, and there are I've met feminist men that I've met that have understood a bit, like, okay, maybe we're all equal, but it's very much that kind of white, it's almost on par with white feminism. You can use that argument of, let's break it right down. The fact that you have a 6-figure salary and your wife is making you your lunches and dinner and facilitating that career, plot twist, she is entitled to half of that 6-figure salary, and that I mean, I'm simplifying it again, but I think that unless the conversation is at that level, then it's not really worth having the conversation.
Yeah, and I think you get a lot of intellectualizing the problem from men on the left who say the right things but turn around and act differently in their personal lives, and part of that is just general not sharing the reproductive labour burden of being, you know, in a relationship with someone. That's childcare. And like, even in my family growing up, that was the case. As much as I love my dad, he could not cook for shit.
He was never taught.
Yeah, and he didn't look after the kids as much. Even though he earned significantly less than my mother, like she still
did it all.
Of the
Yeah.
of the care work.
Yeah.
I think that's still quite common.
Yeah.
In a lot of men.
Yeah, and I think there's, like you say, the systems are put in place to almost, you have to fight for that to not be the case. When my husband and I, small anecdote about us, but when my husband and I moved to Japan, it was, I've already lived here before, I've already kind of ticked that box in my life, and it's very patriarchal, it's very capitalist, and before I went through this revelation, I didn't really deal with that, but I said to him, I said, if we're going to both have a job out here, and I'm going to be also in charge of speaking Japanese because I'm bilingual, I'm not also then going to run the household and cook everything and clean everything and do the ironing and have to think about is the food in the fridge and everything. So we've split that entirely, and he does everything internal, domestic, everything, cooks every meal, irons every shirt, hoovers, and I deal with external stuff like jobs, GP stuff, appointments, buying things. And when I tell people this system that makes perfect sense and is fair, and we both earn the exact same salary, the pushback of like, you're a vixen manipulating witch devil, and how have you know, and it's like, what we have is actually the closest thing to equality or equity that we could aim for, and it's perceived as the opposite. And so I think that the society is nowhere near ready for actual equality.
Yeah.
She's
It's
controlling
common within the movements as well, like
really
the patriarchal sort of ethics and labour's division of labours, and within union movements is notoriously bad.
God, yeah.
Within like a lot of strike movements, you find a lot of people who, if you're on a picket line, a lot of people who bring snacks and coffee and stuff tend to be women. They tend to sort of shoulder on that burden, and these are things that are just like, it is incredibly, it just takes a lot of work to try and break this sort of shit down.
Yeah, for sure.
To reproduce something new within even left-wing spaces, never mind society as a whole.
I can imagine. Well, as we can't solve those in any more time, I guess I'll stop it there. But thank you so much. Thank you for your time, and thank you for putting up with my random ramblings. I'll still be checking out your lives and videos, and I do, because I don't have that same knowledge, a lot of my knowledge building and research comes from other YouTubers that I trust and that have the knowledge. So basically I'm stealing all your intelligence. I hope that's okay. But
that's why we do it.
Yeah, of course. Good.
Thanks so much for having me.
Love to be a friend of the show. Cool. Well, thank you so much. Have a lovely evening. Take care of yourself.
You too.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks again to everyone that made it this far into the video. I just wanted to take this moment to ask if you could please like, comment or subscribe if you enjoyed today's content. If you want to show your support even further, there are two things you can do. For one-time support, I have a Throne account where you can buy me a coffee, you can buy me lunch, or you can even pay for a full video. And that's just like a one-time donation to, you know, pledge your support for me, which would be really, really lovely of you and would help me out so much. Or if you'd love to support me full term, please head over to my Patreon account. The links are below, and I have 3 tiers. For just £2 you can join, become a supporter, and get access instantaneously to a whole bunch of other content. And then there's also an £8 or £20 a month tier where you'll get even more access to like lives just with me, Q&A, one-to-one chat with myself. You always get a personal message if you become a patron in general. They should be called matron, actually. I love that. It's like matriarch. Oh my god. Everyone will get a personal message from me thanking them so much for pledging, and it would just mean the world to me. My channel is tiny little small, and to my patrons already there, I love you all very much, and thank you. Like, really thank you from the bottom of my heart. I actually met Abigail Thorne at Trans Pride, and I said, "You're the reason I started a YouTube channel," and she said, "Oh, that's a shame. I'm so sorry."